Somewhere along the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay, in the spring of 2021, a hunter in Calvert County, Maryland, raised a crossbow at something the field guide said could not be there. Not a snapping turtle, not a large fish misjudged in low light. Lying in the marsh grass, 400 miles north of where its range was supposed to end, was a full-grown American alligator, in a state with no alligators on any official map. He killed it because nothing in the regulations told him what else to do, and the record of that animal joined a file that grows a little longer and a little harder to explain every year. For this to mean anything, you have to understand that the alligator is supposed to have a hard ceiling, a line on the map you could almost draw with a ruler. For as long as anyone has kept records, the northern edge of the American alligator's range has stopped in coastal North Carolina. The animals thin out as you move up the coast, rarer and rarer, until they run out entirely around Merchant's Mill Pond, a state park in Gates County just a few miles south of the Virginia line. That is the end of the world as far as a wild alligator is concerned. Agency document after agency document calls North Carolina the northern extent of the range, and the reason given is always the same, and it sounds airtight. Cold. An alligator cannot make its own heat. It needs the air above roughly 40 degrees just to move with purpose, and above about 70 to digest the food in its own stomach. Too many freezing days, the logic says, and it simply cannot survive. The cold is the wall. The cold is why Florida holds more than 1 million of them, and Maryland, on paper, holds none. And yet the animal on the Chesapeake was real. So was a string of others, surfacing in places the wall was built to keep them out of. Tennessee, the Great Dismal Swamp, the cold fringes of the mid-Atlantic, and water that freezes every winter. So this is the question we are going to follow, and it does not have a clean answer. Are these animals lost, escaped, or is the wall itself starting to move? Because the people whose job it is to know do not agree, and the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Start with what is solid, because everything that follows is going to test it. How real is this northern wall in the first place? It is not folklore. It is a monitored, surveyed, scientifically defended boundary. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission runs a dedicated alligator monitoring program for exactly this reason, because the state sits at the very edge of where the species can hold on, and edges are where change shows up first. Biologists from North Carolina State University and the U.S. Geological Survey run spotlight surveys along the coast, counting eyeshine in the dark, mapping where the animals actually are. The animals watched, protected, and counted here precisely because, at the margin, the population is too precarious to take for granted. And what they find is a population under strain. Alligators in North Carolina grow more slowly than their southern cousins. They breed less often, their local populations are fragile, quicker to blink out because every extra cold day taxes an animal running on borrowed heat. The state's known strongholds are not random either. They cluster in the lower Cape Fear and News river valleys and around the Sounds, in the warmest, most protected pockets the coast has to offer. Push past those north and inland, and the habitat thins until the animal can no longer hold a year-round foothold. This is a species living with its back against the cold, surviving but not thriving exactly where the textbook says the wall should be. So when an alligator turns up well past that line, it is not a rounding error. It is something the map says should not happen. Which raises the first real question. Could one of these animals even survive up there long enough to be found? The answer increasingly is that they are being found. Past the wall, again and again. The most documented frontier is Virginia's Great Dismal Swamp, a vast, dark, half-drowned forest straddling the North Carolina and Virginia border. And the history here is its own kind of clue. When William Byrd surveyed the swamp in 1728, he wrote down the local tales of alligators but recorded no sighting of his own. For most of modern history, Virginia was simply gator-free. The animals had been extirpated, wiped from the state entirely. And yet today, vagrant alligators from North Carolina are documented wandering north into that swamp, back across a border they were supposedly gone from for centuries. Then there is Tennessee. And Tennessee is where this stops being about lone wanderers. Wildlife officials there now describe a small but genuinely established reproducing population in the southwestern corner of the state. Animals that appear to have moved up through inland river systems on their own. threading north along the warm, slow water that connects the Gulf states to the interior. Not pets dropped in a pond, not a one-off escapee. A breeding foothold, hundreds of miles inland from the coast everyone pictures when they picture a gator. And then, the outliers. The Maryland animal near the Chesapeake shot with a crossbow because the state had no other category for it. Scattered reports pushing the dots on the map further and further from the warm, safe south. Each one alone is easy to wave off as a fluke. Together they start to look less like accidents and more like a direction. Which forces the harder question. How does a reptile that looks built for the tropics live through a northern winter at all? This is where the model in your head about this animal falls apart. Because the assumption underneath the whole cold is a wall idea is that an alligator in freezing water is a dead alligator. It is not. And the way it stays alive is one of the strangest survival behaviors on the continent. In deep winter, an alligator does something biologists call brumation, the reptile's version of hibernation. Its metabolism doesn't just slow, it nearly stops. Its heart, in the cold, can fall to around 3 beats a minute. 3. It stops eating for 4 or 5 months at a stretch, idling at the very floor of what still counts as life. But the uncanny part is what it does when the water above it freezes solid. It does not flee, and it does not drown. It senses the ice forming, tips its body down at an angle, and pushes the very tip of its snout up through the surface, and then lets the ice freeze around its own nose. Just the nostrils, breaking the white sheet. The rest of the animal hangs suspended in the black water below, motionless, breathing through that one small hole, sometimes for days. Park workers in North Carolina have a name for the videos that go viral every time it happens. Gatorsicles. Tourists film what look like dead reptiles entombed in a pond, snouts jutting up like scaly periscopes, and every time the experts have to explain, no, that animal is not dead. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. The behavior sits in the scientific record as far back as the early 1980s, when researchers at the Savannah River Lab watched an alligator hold a breathing hole open in an iced-over South Carolina pond for days. A second study, a year later, described the posture in clinical detail, the snout broken through the ice while the rest of the head and body angled back down into the den below. Weird, in the words of one museum curator who has studied these animals for a living, is exactly the right word. As weird as it gets for an alligator. This is also why the northern animals run smaller. A shorter feeding season makes a slower growing gator, and biologists have noted for decades that alligators at the cold edge stay more modest in size than the giants of Louisiana and the Florida Everglades. The cold doesn't only kill outright, it taxes every single year, shrinking the margins an animal has to work with. And here is the catch that keeps this honest. That same iced-in alligator from 1982 died anyway. Its body temperature kept dropping, past the point of recovery, down toward the freezing mark. The snorkeling buys time, it does not make the animal cold-proof. So the survival is a balance, decided by a few degrees in a few weeks, with death waiting on the wrong side of both, which means the wall is not really a wall at all. It is a balance. So the next question is the obvious one. Is something tilting it? Here's the explanation that at first seems to tie the whole thing together. If the northern limit is set by cold, by the number of killing cold days an animal has to survive, then a warming climate should peel that limit northward. Fewer lethal winter days means more places a gator can thread the needle. The wall doesn't fall, it slides. And there is real science under this, not just speculation. In 2018, researchers Ryberg and Lawing modeled how suitable alligator habitat could shift under future climate scenarios, and their projections showed the range expanding northward, but in a specific eerie shape. Not a clean march. A patchy network of small, isolated populations. Stepping stones of newly survivable habitat appearing further and further north. Researchers working in the Everglades have flagged the same thing from the opposite end. Warming coastal waters may already be nudging alligators and their crocodile cousins toward new ground, hinting at what one scientist called a new landscape for the species. A patchy network of small northern populations. Hold that phrase because it describes exactly what the map is starting to show. A foothold in Tennessee, wanderers in the dismal swamp, an animal dead on the Chesapeake. It fits almost too well, but even the climate story refuses to stay simple. The same warming that opens northern winters can close southern habitat from the other direction. Researchers have warned that drought and saltwater pushing inland with rising seas could degrade the warm coastal wetlands the animal came from, even as new ground opens up to the north. The picture that emerges isn't a clean migration toward a better world. It's a species being squeezed and nudged at both ends of its range at once, leaking northward into a scattered patchwork that may or may not hold. And that is precisely the problem. Because there is a second explanation that fits the very same dots, and it has nothing to do with climate at all. This is the reason the title of this video is honest. This is why nobody can actually say. For every wild alligator that genuinely walked north on its own, there is the shadow of another possibility no biologist can rule out. Somebody put it there. The exotic pet trade has been moving baby alligators around the country for generations. A hatchling is small, cheap, and astonishingly easy to buy. It is also a creature that grows into a 10-foot apex predator, and the predictable thing happens. The novelty wears off, the animal outgrows the bathtub, and it gets dumped. Into a pond, a canal, a lake at the edge of a town 1,000 miles from any wild gator. This is not a fringe theory. It is documented history. Records from North Carolina note escaped pets, including tropical caimans imported from South America, a different animal entirely, turning up and being logged in the same files as alligator sightings. An animal evicted from a golf course near Kings Mountain, deep in the Piedmont, far past any natural range, penetrating inland where no wild gator should be. These animals are real. They are physically present. And to a startled person standing over one in a drainage ditch, they are completely indistinguishable from a wild pioneer that swam its way north over years. That is the trap the whole mystery falls into. Every northern sighting splits into two stories the instant you try to explain it. Did this animal expand the range, a point for the climate-driven march? Or did it ride north in the back of a car and get released, a point for nothing but human carelessness? The dot on the map looks identical either way. You cannot tell a pioneer from a castaway by looking at it. So the data that should answer the question is muddied at the source. For every gator that proves the wall is moving, there may be one that proves only that someone owned a reptile they shouldn't have. Which leaves one last thread, and it deepens the unease instead of settling it. Where exactly do these northern animals keep turning up? Look at the locations and a pattern emerges that doesn't care which explanation you prefer. They surface in human water, the retention pond, the golf course lagoon, the drainage canal threading through a subdivision, the slow river running past a town. Whether an animal swam there or was dumped there, it ends up in the same kind of place, the engineered, climate-buffered waterways we build everywhere we live, and those waters can be quietly more survivable than the wild marsh next door. Warmed by runoff, fed by discharge, deep enough not to freeze to the bottom. Without ever intending to, we may be building the exact stepping stones the climate model predicted. A patchy northern chain of survivable ponds, laid down one subdivision at a time. The animal does not need us to plan for it. It only needs us to leave the water warm. There is a darker version of this too. An alligator that finds easy food near people, a fed animal, a habituated animal loses the wariness that keeps it hidden, and a hidden gator that suddenly is not hidden is exactly the kind of animal that ends up in a report, on a map, in a file. So the very places most likely to keep a northern gator alive through winter are also the places most likely to put it in front of a human being. The surfacing and the surviving may be the same phenomenon, seen from two sides, which is why the experts hedge and why the hedge is not a dodge. A herpetologist will tell you honestly that some of these are surely escaped pets, and in the same breath that some of them surely are not, and that the climate is, in fact, warming in the direction that would let the wall move, and that telling those forces apart, animal by animal, pond by pond, is close to impossible with the tools they have. The disagreement isn't carelessness. It is the only honest position left when every clue points two ways at once. So step back from any single animal and look at the whole file at once. Reproducing population taking hold in southwestern Tennessee. Vagrants pushing north into a Virginia swamp. The species was wiped out of a century ago. An alligator dead on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, 400 miles past the line. Escaped pets surfacing in the Piedmont. climate models projecting a patchy northern expansion that looks unnervingly like the map already forming. This is not one strange event, it is a scatter of them, across multiple states, across multiple years, all pointing the same way, north. And the thing they share is that not one of them arrives with a clean explanation attached. The Tennessee population looks like genuine natural expansion. The Maryland animal looks like a stray. The swamp wanderers look like the range breathing back into old ground. The golf course gators look like dump pets. Every category is real, and every category produces the same headline. The dots keep appearing further north, the agencies keep logging them, and the careful people keep declining to say which force is doing it. Because the truth is almost certainly all of them at once, in proportions no one can yet measure. That is what keeps turning up really means here. Not one migration with one cause. A convergence of a warming climate, a careless pet trade, and an animal far better at surviving the cold than we ever gave it credit for, all pushing in the same direction, and all wearing the same face when they arrive. The hunter in Calvert County did the only thing the rules gave him to do. He filed the animal away, one more line in a record that gets longer every year, further north every year, and no clearer. Maybe it swam there. Maybe it was carried. Maybe the wall that held this animal in the south for 10,000 years is quietly coming apart, one mild winter and one unfrozen pond at a time. The people who study it for a living cannot yet tell you which. What is known is that the animal can breathe through ice, that the winters at the edge of its range are getting shorter, and that somewhere just north of a line that was supposed to mean something, in a pond behind a town with no folklore for it, a cold-blooded thing is holding perfectly still in the dark water, waiting for spring, the way it has waited far longer than there have been maps to draw, or borders to cross.